Welcome to Not Alone with Melissa Methven, a safe haven where we embrace our truth and break the silence surrounding our struggles. Here, we believe in the power of sharing our stories, fostering a loving community filled with hope, tools, and resources for healing. Together, we'll explore the journeys of those who have faced adversity, offering insights and support to ensure no one suffers alone. Join us as we shine a light on the path to healing, one authentic conversation at a time. Kristy Crabtree is trailblazing in her field of mental health and founder and clinical director of Inner Light Counseling, with a thriving practice that employs over 40 counselors and generates millions in revenue. Kristy has dedicated her career to transforming lives through innovative therapeutic approaches. Since beginning her journey as a therapist in 2009, she has recognized the limitations of traditional talk therapy and has passionately explored new modalities to unlock deeper healing. Kristy is also the author of the groundbreaking book, coming out soon, Sacred Revolution: The Codes to Unleash Your Spiritual Technology and Create the New Earth, where she shares her insights on spirituality and personal transformation. In this episode, we'll dive into her philosophy on why talk therapy alone may not suffice and explore how we can embrace a more holistic approach to mental health. Join us as we uncover the wisdom and vision of Kristy Crabtree. So welcome.
Thank you. What a sweet introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's true. I like the audience to just kind of get a grasp of who you are and what we're going to talk about today, because I feel like we can talk, in so many different directions. But I'd love for you to share, to just start off, like, where did you realize that talk therapy was not enough?
Oh, good question. Gosh, so this has been such a parallel process for me. I remember being a new therapist and, you kind of just learn the basics like cognitive behavioral and those kinds of things. And I remember, walking into session for the first time and at some point feeling like, you know what, there's this common denominator with my clients, and I don't care what their diagnosis is, it all stems from trauma. So I'm like, okay, trauma therapy is where it's at. I'm going to get some practices under my belt, evidence-based practices like EMDR and internal family systems therapy and hypnosis, because I was like, I want to access like deep states, the subconscious mind, the body, right, where the trauma is stored. And I recognized very quickly as I was learning these modalities, I was building my confidence and I was being more effective with clients as I started to integrate, more somatically based therapies. But I was also doing my own counseling at the time, because every good counselor should be self-aware and do their own work. Because if you don't do your own work, as a therapist, you burn yourself out. Because it's not how much you work that burns you out. It's what are you taking on as a result of somebody else's trauma landing on your unhealed parts. And I became very aware that I was burning out. And I became very aware that it wasn't about my clients, it was about me. So I was doing these trainings, trying to figure it out. And I was also in counseling myself. And I was so frustrated with myself because I kept feeling like there's got to be more. There's got to be more. I feel like I've gotten to the bottom of it. I've processed all the big traumas. But why do I not feel whole? And so I was kind of on this search for myself. And so it wasn't until I learned hypnosis that I started seeing, this doesn't just span into this life. There's past lives that are now involved. I slipped into one of those on accident for the first time. I'll never forget that experience, and started seeing that my clients could go there too, and realizing that this lifetime is just a blip of a much broader picture. And that still didn't get me to the root of my trauma. And it wasn't until I tried psychedelic psychotherapy that I realized I had repressed memories. And what was so fascinating to me was the reason they were repressed. It wasn't because I was afraid to remember or didn't want to remember. It was because I was so young. And when you're little, you don't have a narrative running through your brain like you do as an adult. You're much more right brain oriented. The left brain isn't constantly creating narratives. You're open and you're aware and you're experiencing as awareness. And so when you have a trauma that you don't necessarily understand and you can't make sense out of it and you don't have the language to describe it, it kind of just stores in your body as sensations of fear, of terror, of panic. And it was the medicine that helped me see, oh, that those feelings that I thought were just free floating panic or fear were actually connected to an experience. And I had to almost be in that state of just pure awareness without my mind's narrative clouding it. It's like a state-induced remembering where I could remember. And I didn't want to believe that it was true. Not because I didn't want to think it didn't happen to me, but because I didn't want to think that the person who did it was capable of doing that. Because that changed my worldview. And that made me part of a club I didn't want to exist in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a really long-winded explanation.
No, I love that you say that, because I can relate to that. As if I thought back, I don't have a lot of childhood memories, before 5 or before 6. But I think, like you said, you kind of block those out. You don't want to see them. So for you, plant medicine help you to kind of see it so you can kind of move through it, and
yeah. And on the other side of remembering is absolute freedom. And I didn't know that, but we don't intentionally block memories out. What happens is sometimes the trauma we go through is so incredibly overwhelming and it rocks our worldview, right? Like all of a sudden our world becomes so unsafe. But when we're little, God gave us this protective mechanism of, no, your parents sustain you. Your parents give you life. Your parents put the roof over your head and the food in your mouth. So keep that connection at all costs. Betray yourself first so that you can eat, so that you can survive, so that you get in less trouble. And so it's just this built-in defense. And when we start to understand that and really reduce the shame around, oh, I chose to forget, or I blocked it out, because that can feel so shameful sometimes. And it's like, no, that's our God-given defense mechanism. And what's so beautiful is our God-given remembering mechanism is that when there's fertile soil, like a flower, I almost picture a flower because it's got like layers upon layers of petals, and those petals they like hold on tight until you give it the right soil and the right amount of sunlight and the right amount of rain or water. And then they open and they expose the most beautiful bloom. And when we've had a lifetime of early childhood trauma, our parts or our petals hold on real tight to protect us. And when the conditions are right as we get older and we have safe relationships and safe families and safe community partners and, people who love and support us, it's like we open up and bloom. And then that deep-rooted trauma can be witnessed and seen, but not until we're safe.
Oh, that's a beautiful. I love that picture that you paint. So which plant medicine did you, if you don't mind sharing, that you see more of an impact with some of your patients?
So, right now, just because of the laws in the United States, there was a war on drugs, that started with Ronald Reagan. And unfortunately, most of these plant medicines became illegal at that time. And that's still the case for most of them. And so as a licensed counselor, I can only work with what's legal. And right now that's ketamine. However, in Denver, Colorado, in Oregon, you can work with psilocybin and sometimes DMT. In Mexico, you can use different things. In South America, there's ayahuasca, or Central America. But personally, I can only work with clients with ketamine. Now, my own healing journey, I've gone to those places where psilocybin is legal and I've done my own work with them. And I found that to be an amazing plant teacher. That was the plant teacher for me that helped me recall the repressed memories. And truly, I really think that was the biggest catalyst to my own personal healing.
And when you say repressed memories, are you even talking about past lives as well and from generations that our bodies can remember those?
Mm-hmm. Actually, yes. So I did have a lot of past life memories, although those weren't the ones that were burdening me. It was a memory, of sexual abuse from when I was an infant and toddler that was really the catalyst to, my own healing. However, what was really interesting is one thing that did come up during plant medicine was a generational trauma where I was shown that, what led to this person abusing me was that his father had some deviant behaviors and some trauma that traumatized him. And so then those burdens just kind of got passed down. So I was actually not only just shown what happened to me, I was shown on a much broader picture, like there's compassion available for your abuser too. But it stops with you, right? Like you're the one appointed to do the healing and to release this burden for generations.
Yeah, almost like that allowed you to almost have this more of, instead of that big weight and resentment and anger, is more of that compassion and the forgiveness of some,
forgiveness with boundaries, like
boundaries. Yeah. Which
like I see the broader picture,
yeah,
but you can't sit at the table anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I like
because
that.
I need to be okay.
The boundaries. I love that you mentioned boundaries. You can forgive, but with boundaries, and more for you to not hold that weight and you can kind of move on and whatnot. But for me, boundaries was something I've never had in my relationships and even sometimes my children and using my voice. So that's something I've had to work on, and how it provides more freedom and that peace that you need in your life. So I really like that you've mentioned that. And I've been so curious about hypnotherapy. So I love that you mentioned that. One of my favorite books is called Many Lives, Many Masters. Have you read it? Yeah.
Girl, I trained with Brian Weiss in Pasadena, like in 2012. He was my first teacher.
Wow.
My first experience of my own first past life memory. I love him dearly. That book changed my life.
Yeah, I read that one. I pass it on to other people, but I really, really love that book. And it really shows how, past life and what certain patterns in your life can keep showing up, and it could be a past life thing. Like for example, for me too, I'd be curious to some these modalities for myself, because when I was in vitro, my mom was pregnant. I had a twin. Supposedly a twin brother, but my mom got in a really bad car accident when she was 7 months pregnant. And that impact at the hospital, they said, "Oh, you're going to lose this children." And she thought she only had one. My mom's like, "Oh no, I'm not losing this child." But I know she ended up, when she delivered me, saw that there was a twin. There was another baby, but he passed because of that trauma. So I know probably that in vitro trauma is something that I will need to kind of work through as well, and still kind of stuck in my body somehow.
Oh, absolutely. And I've regressed people back to in utero traumas because, and that's a big trauma. Bonding and being with a twin as an infant in utero and having that closeness and that connection to then have that be gone, that's real. So there probably is some work to be done around there. And it'd be interesting just to even be able to start identifying what are the beliefs that maybe you picked up as a result of that loss that early on. But not only that, because, we have this connection to the placenta in utero. And so all of that fluid, right, is being passed between you and mom, and water, which we're, 90 something percent made of water, it's transferred, through that blood, through that in vitro cord blood. And so as that's going on, all of mom's hormones and emotions are being transferred from her to you. And so her beliefs, her fears, her concerns, her trauma, right, sometimes can pass.
I know she was going through a lot of trauma, physical abuse and anxiety and things like that. So those I know from talking to others that has shown up for that child, in that moment. And I could think of that even my own children. I know once Mateus was born, my son, second born, Scott was already quite into the, depression and medications as far as opioid addiction. And he did not connect with Mateus when he was born. I remember that there was just not that bond. And Mateus was colicky for almost 4 months. And I know there was almost this cry, for his dad. And that still shows up till this day, that abandonment, that shame or guilt and love and not feeling enough, Yes. And so I do recognize all that. So I love that you share all that. I want to ask some questions regarding your book as well, because I'm really fascinated and cannot read the full book as it'll come out soon. When do you anticipate for it to come out?
Right now, the editor, we're anticipating June, so pretty
June?
soon.
Okay, I am so excited. So her book is going to be called Sacred Revolution, The Codes to Unleash Your Spiritual Technology and Create the New Earth. So what I have here is, what does it mean to die the old self before being reborn into a more authentic version of yourself?
Absolutely. So much of my book was from what I learned during like my own psychedelic or meditative or spiritual experiences. And I started to notice these patterns. So my book has 4 sections to it. The first one is just know yourself. Who are we? So often we think we know who we are, but our patterns are so deeply unconscious that we actually don't, because we repress or suppress so much of who we actually are because of our traumas. So when I say know yourself, I don't just mean know yourself. I mean, what are the unconscious parts? And Carl Jung has a quote that I think sums that up. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it rules our life, and we call it fate. So we have to know what's hiding behind the curtain, right? Like the Wizard of Oz. We've got to rip that back and go, okay, what's really under there? The thing that stone that I'm so afraid to turn over and look at, that's knowing yourself. But then once you know yourself and you see those patterns, it's not parts of you that we want to die, because we want to actually heal them and incorporate them so you feel more whole, because trauma fractures us. It's the beliefs associated. It's the lies that we start to believe about ourselves and the world, right? When we're young and we have trauma and we start to see like, oh, the world is really unsafe, or maybe we start to believe that I'm bad, or, I'm unlovable, we start to assimilate those beliefs and project them out onto the world and onto God sometimes even. Maybe God is unsafe. Maybe God doesn't love me because I'm so unworthy. Yeah. This stuff goes so deep. So we have to recognize what are those beliefs so that we can kill those beliefs. And then we kill the beliefs, and the scariest part happens, which is, well, without that, who am I? And we have to be so accountable to that. It's like, well, if I'm not blaming my childhood, that means I've got to be accountable for all my responsibilities, all my failures, all my wins. Like I can't blame that on my past anymore. And people love to hang on to the old beliefs because they can blame it on things and they could be a victim in their lives. But when we are in that in-between, rebirthing ourselves, it's like this invitation into the womb again. It's dark in there and we don't know what's on the other side of that. And this is the space where we really cultivate our faith, because we have to trust. I know I need to let this go, but I don't know what's next. And we just want to grip and we want to hang on so bad. And so this is that spiritual process of surrender. The body knows what to do when you're giving birth. It takes on something of its own. There's a life force energy that's coursing through your body when you give birth as a mother, and the body just knows what to do. We don't control that. And it's like when we rebirth ourselves again and again and again in this lifetime, it's the same process. There's a process that's happening. It's out of our control. We can cling on, and that's going to be really painful, or we could surrender and allow it. And that's going to cause a lot less pain. And lastly, the 4th part of my book is you know yourself as creator. When you're not a victim to anything anymore, and you know that everything in your life has happened for you and there's purpose in the pain, you're not a victim, you become the creator. And you get to co-create and co-design the life that you want to create with God. And that's when you start to know who you really are, how powerful you truly are as a creator. And when you align your will with God's will, all the doors just start to open up, right? And you get to live this life beyond your wildest dreams. So that's kind of the 4 sections of this book.
I love that. I love the way you explain it, and because I really can resonate to everything that you're saying, because I'm living that. I feel like I'm living that. Once I removed that veil and just shed all my truth in my book, it just opened up this new rebirth. That's what I always said. I said, once I did that, it's like I have a new chance at life. I'm a whole new person because I was able to see all of me, all the good, the bad, and I take accountability for all the decisions, where I'm at right now and how talk about co-creating with God. I feel that's where I completely surrender. God will tell me to do crazy things sometimes, like start a podcast. And I'm like, what? Okay, talk about in front of a whole bunch of people, write a book. And I'm all like, me? I'm like, who am I? but then I just kind of surrender and jump into it. And then I realize, wow, it lights me up. I get so excited and I really love it. And I don't get tired doing it, even though, you know, you could spend these 14-hour days filming our episodes, you know, but it was so much fun. And I just keep surrendering. So I'd love to allow others to truly surrender. It's hard. I do see it hard.
It is hard
to surrender. I find, like, for me, it was so hard to see my truth, even though there was some people that would come in to my life and kind of plant that truth. It's like I wasn't allowing myself to want to see it. So how do you approach that with some, you know, friends or patients, you know, where you're giving them guidance, but they almost have to come to their own clarity, right?
We do. I mean, there's these dialectics in life where it's like, truly we are alone, like at the end of the day, right? Like the responsibility is all on our shoulders, but we're also so loved and so surrounded and so guided. And God puts the right people and situations and opportunities into our paths, and we get to choose those things. We can accept them or reject them. But what I like to look at when people are feeling just kind of stuck or having a hard time surrendering is going to the part of them that has the fear and asking the right questions, like really getting to know that part. Like, okay, the part of you that holds the fear, where do you feel that in your body? I use internal family systems therapy, so that's kind of what this is. You know, a lot of times I say, well, I feel it in my chest. Okay, what are you afraid would happen if you made that decision, if you left that relationship, if you started your own business? And like, well, you know, I'm afraid that there's not a better partner out there for me, even though I know he's abusive, or I know, you know, he is demeaning sometimes. Like, what if there's nothing better? Right. So it's like looking at these belief systems and then asking the next question, which is, okay, how old were you the first time you believed that you can't have good things? Because usually it's not about the relationship. It's not about the job. It's about, you know, when you were 4 years old and like, maybe you couldn't have the good thing because you didn't get good enough grades, and you picked up this programming or this message that you have to earn and deserve good things, or you shouldn't have them, or whatever, right? Like we all have, but it always goes back and predates, and it's these things that we picked up in early childhood, and we have to sit with those parts. And we have to update them and let them know, like, oh my gosh, you know, so often we have these 5-year-olds running our show and making decisions about our lives out of like their fear-based paradigms. And we have to update these young parts of us and let them know, like, oh my gosh, yeah, you still think you're 5 and you're just still trying to protect me from rejection. But I don't need you to protect me anymore. In fact, you should have never had to do that. And we get to do these do-overs, and we get to update them. Wow. And release them from having to carry all this responsibility that should have never been theirs in the first place.
I love that. That sounds like very powerful. What do you call it? Family?
It's called internal family systems.
Okay. I really like that. It sounds a little bit like parts work.
Yeah, it is.
Done. Okay. And because that was that visual. Yeah. You I remember looking back to me, let's say I'm 5 years old, and then it was like that 30-year-old woman, and kind of embracing her, talking to her, seeing what she needs, but also kind of, if I was ready, letting it go. And for me, I always like water. So just kind of releasing whatever it needs.
You were doing IFS. That's exactly it.
Okay. Oh, is it? Okay, great.
I think so. It sounds like it.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it was so powerful at first when I remember starting it, and I still actually moved here, and I was like, oh, that's quite the investment. You know, I had paid. It was, I remember, quoted for $10,000, and I was like, oh my gosh. Wow, I didn't know therapy would be, you know, this much, and how can anybody afford this? But then I just did it, and it was the best investment. You know, I always say, people, you pray on it, find a way, take out. I mean, you are the best investment, you know, to put in, because that was such powerful work to get me to where I'm at now. I'll never be done. You know, I'm always so curious, you know, and I can't wait to work with you. And
I don't think we're ever done, right? Like, my hope for everybody is that we never stop being curious towards ourselves, or like learning more.
I mean, I feel I can't read fast enough, so I listen to like 4 audibles, you know, here and there, and because I just crave it, and I find it really fascinating, just for me and my own family as well. So I'd like to also ask you, how do you suggest people navigate the limited space between their old identity and the new one that they're stepping into?
Right. So that is tough. I mean, honestly, it's a spiritual process, right? So it's like two things are happening at once. There's surrender, but then there's like the new that's approaching and not quite there yet. And for me in my own personal journey, it was, for me, God communicates in the language of signs and synchronicities. And so it was asking to be guided, asking to be shown the next step, asking for validation that walking away from this aspect is the right decision to make. And starting this one is also the right decision to make, and trusting those signs and synchronicities that would come in. And my book was even an example of that. So I'll give you like a concrete example, because you were such a catalyst. Like God puts people on your path and you were one of them. So it was so crazy. I had the wildest summer with all these transformative spiritual experiences. I'd always known I'd write a book someday. It was just intuitively something I knew, but I always said, it just, whatever needs to happen hasn't happened yet. Well, the yet happened, and I had a book in my heart and on my mind, and I told God, okay, I see you. Now, if you want me to write this book, I said, first of all, I don't know how. I'm watching my friend going through this process of trying to get a literary agent, and it's like taking all her time, and it looks like an actual nightmare. And pitching it to different publishing companies and which one, and they want me to change this and edit that. And I'm like, I don't want any of that. I want it to be authentic and real, and I don't have time to find a literary agency. I just told God, I was like, listen, if I'm supposed to write a book, it can't be for like 3 people. I'm not going to take the time out of my life to write it so like my mom can just read it or something. Like, that's dumb. But I was just like, I need you to help me. Like, I need you to show me how to find the right publisher who's aligned in my values, who can allow me to be authentic. And then I surrendered it. I put it down and I stopped searching and I stopped trying. And I said, it was kind of almost snarky. I was like, fine, God, you want me to do it? You figure it out. It was like a challenge. And 10 days later, I'm walking my dogs and my husband like texted me. And I'm like, why is he texting me while I'm walking the dogs? And I look and he's like, hey, look, this lady Kira from Joan of Arc Publishing is going to be in town for like what, she's like a neighbor, this girl Melissa. She's like having this book launch party, but she's like, not only that, she's going to help people write the books the way she helped Melissa write this book, which is on an island, and you can write it in 5 days. So he's like, you don't even need to take like, I was thinking about taking a 3-month sabbatical to go write this book, or 6-month sabbatical. He's like, you don't need to take sabbatical. Like, you can do it in 5 days and take a vacation. And then we can like go meet her at Melissa's book launch and just see if it feels right. And I was like, whoa.
Wow. Okay. I love that. I never knew the story of how, I know I met you at my book launch and I didn't even know who you were. And I was like, oh, this is exciting. Like somebody that's not my neighbor or my friend,
yes.
Coming to my book launch. And oh my gosh, I love this story.
Yes. So you were like one of those people, because I had reached out to Kira like the very next day and she was like, yes, I'll be at Melissa's book launch. Like, come join me, come meet me. Like, let's talk, about the island. And Jeremy was there from Reconnect and he was like, I'm going to be at the island. And I like bonded with Jeremy immediately. And I was like, this just feels right. And so then, just again, trusting those signs and synchronicities, because I didn't know if I was supposed to write a book. I was very uncertain about that. And I asked God to show me, and he did.
Yeah. So, I always say to people, like, you got to ask, and you almost have to be kind of clear, right? What do you find with your
specific and clear?
Yeah.
I always get this image of like my life guides, who I kind of view as my spiritual team, and my stepdad is included in that. I feel like my angels are included in that, my loved ones, and probably guides that I don't know. I've seen some that present in ways that I'm like, what are you? But whatever. So, but I just kind of see them up there twiddling their thumbs. Like, you going to ask? Like, I can't intervene unless you ask me. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like some help with this, please.
Don't you find it's so powerful? And when you do get an answer like that, like, do you just get so excited? You're like, wow, we know there's God, there's our guides and our angel. But when it's so clear with a message and an answer, I'm impressed every single time. Actually, right before Christmas this year, I had asked a question as well. And I had thrown out there, I'm like, oh, I just want to see a hummingbird. That would be my sign, that this answer to this question. And literally, I'm walking back from the gym, from my house, and I'm on the phone, and this hummingbird comes straight dead on in front of my face, right here, and it stops me in my track. And it just flies right in front, and then it goes a little bit to my side view, but stays there. I wish I had it filmed. I mean, I was just like on the phone going, oh my goodness. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, well, I better be careful what I ask.
It's true though, but we do. And I mean, that's why, going back to that Carl Jung quote, if you don't allow the unconscious to become conscious, that's the place you manifest from. Right? Because your thoughts, your desires, like kind of going back to what you said, well, some people really struggle to make changes because they're holding on to these old beliefs. So it's those old beliefs and old paradigms. And they're like, why do these same situations keep showing up in my life again and again and again? Well, because you haven't overcome them. They're trying to do. Even the darkness. When we encounter dark situations again and again and again, that darkness is trying to shatter that old belief system so that you can surrender it, so that you can then evolve into that place where you're now consciously creating with the divine. And I have been shown through plant medicine that everything in nature is sentient and that it communicates with us. And that everything is a part of God and nothing separate. So when you say, God, I want to see a hummingbird, you are in communion with all of nature, which is God. And we can absolutely do that. I've asked stars to fall to let me know the answers. And I've literally asked questions and just seen shooting stars almost as quicker than I can blink my eye. And it blows, like, signs come with a visceral feeling. You could see a hummingbird in the tree and like be like, oh, I don't think that's my sign because, I mean, first of all, that one's so clear, but it comes with a feeling in your body. And so signs aren't just like, oh, is that my sign? It's like, to me, it almost feels like a lifting off of, or like a coldness sometimes, or goosebumps. But like because your DNA is constantly in communication with the field or the divine, your cells respond to what's happening in your environment. And so you have to look at what's that cellular response as this sign comes in.
Oh yeah, the cellular response. Sometimes, I will ask a question and I'll feel it full body, cellular, like it's a big yes, or a no or whatnot. But yeah, I can relate to that.
But we can't see it when we're in trauma because we dissociate. And dissociate means living outside of your body because your body holds so much fear and pain that we don't want to be in there. So we can't hear our guidance very clearly when we have trauma because we're dissociated. So we don't get that answer clearly in our bodies. We have to clean that out.
Well, for me, as I was grieving with Scott, sometimes I was asking for him to guide me or come communicate with me, but I couldn't. And it's so funny because he would go to other people that I barely know. And then they're like, I don't know how you're going to take this, but Scott came to me, he has a message for you. I'm like, well, why isn't he coming to me or my mom or, but I think that makes sense about the trauma. I was still in that fight and flight and a lot of trauma that I had to kind of process through. So how does unhealed trauma manifest in our relationships and daily lives, or even maybe in our health, overall chronic health?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the health part, because whenever we have stress in our body or we experience a trauma, if it's too big for us to process in that moment, or if our environment's too unsafe to process it in, because maybe our partner's not safe, or we have, we're in the middle of a job change and it's just overwhelming, it stores in our cell as a neuropeptide, which is like a tiny little piece of inflammation that sticks to the cell in the part of the body that we associate our trauma with. So I see a lot of women come down with like thyroid issues because they can't speak their truth, or men.
That happened to me. That was me. Right? Yeah, that happened to me.
Men with heart concerns, right? Because they hold so much here and they create this wall of like, I don't really want to let anybody in because it's not safe for a boy to be vulnerable and feel. So they end up with these heart conditions and, the butterflies we get in our stomach and all those different things. And so repression is at the root of so many diseases, so many, especially inflammatory diseases, chronic illness that doctors, don't understand very well. And so it definitely stores in the body that way. And the other part of your question, what was the other part of your question?
Yeah, the other part was, sometimes unhealed trauma, let's say from childhood. And then, for us, we were in relationships in our early 20s, how that just kind of shows up in our relationships as well.
Absolutely.
And us choosing that partner as well.
Yes. So it kind of goes along the lines of, the darkness comes in to show us the light. So I believe that our souls come in with a contract of like, okay, Kristy, you're going to learn these lessons this time. And God will give you all these opportunities in the form of relationships, people, and experiences so that you can learn them, overcome them, recognize them, heal those parts of yourself. And then you can move on from that. And you can have a different experience. And so when we have these unhealed patterns, they're largely unconscious. And part of the process of making them conscious is meeting them experientially again and again throughout relationships. So, I mean, you know, we can look back at our relationships and be like, my goodness, like, why is every man I dated an addict? You know, I could say that. I could say every man I've dated has been an addict, even if I didn't know it, even if it was hidden, or even if he wasn't in the beginning of the relationship, it ended up that way. I was like, oh, finally, I'm not with somebody who's addicted. Turns out eventually that did happen. And so I had to be so accountable and say, what is it in me that is attracting in like a magnet these experiences? Because there's like a magnetic draw that you feel to people. And oh my gosh. So here's another one of, this is actually, I talk about this in my book, is through a meditation. I saw that the heart has this electromagnetic field around it and it emanates. And that's why people love horses so much, because their electromagnetic fields of their heart are so big that, yes, all the love and all the comfort. And ours as humans are smaller.
My daughter loves horses. She's always has. So I'm like, oh, wow.
It's probably so healing to her heart's electromagnetic field. And so what God showed me was like, when you have a trauma when you're young, it's like it leaves a blip in your electromagnetic field of your heart, like in your regularity. Almost like a sound wave, right? And so you're drawn to somebody like a magnet. There's that chemistry, and you're like, ooh, there's chemistry here. Well, it's because he's got the thing that you're trying to work through. He has the opposite. I mean, why do empaths always, bring in the narcissist? Like, right? Why do codependents always draw in the addict? And so God's like, okay, cool. Here's two. I mean, it's like opposite ends of a magnet. And when you put these magnet close, it goes, right? And we do that in relationships. We're like, oh, you've got something. And it's usually trauma. So we're attracted to them like a magnet. And it's so that we can meet ourselves in the place of the wound and neutralize it. Because like if you take a sound wave and you play one sound wave here and the opposite sound wave here, somewhere in the middle, it creates neutrality. So it's an opportunity for both partners to come together. And if they have the skills, if they have the tools, then they're going to learn those lessons as a byproduct of that relationship and both heal those things.
Oh, wow. Wow. I love the way you explain that.
Thank you.
That makes sense. So yeah, like that chemistry, that pull, you're like, oh yeah, I need to be with this person. And you think, oh, maybe that's the soulmate, but it's really because you got to work.
Unfortunately, soulmate relationships. So, I mean, here's the thing. We usually have a few that you're like, that's just never going to work. If he's abusive, if he's shaming you, if he's awful to you, like for the love, don't try to work that out, right? Like it's unacceptable. But sometimes if a partner's ready to take accountability, if they can own their stuff, then there is an opportunity for you two to create heaven in a relationship through working those things out in safety and in harmony together, so you guys can both balance out those lessons that you need each other to heal with. And then you get to create heaven in a relationship. And those are like the most magical experiences.
Wow, that's beautiful. Now I'm just curious how you feel about, because we're talking relationships, so we obviously probably need to work on several things in our lifetime. So then do you feel that we are meant to be with one person then for a really long time? If, people have been married 70 years or, 50 years, as long as they grow, I guess, and learn all the lessons? Or do you feel that, sometimes we're not meant to be here on earth and be with just one partner? We got to kind of move on to grow and whatnot. Just be curious.
Oh, what a great question. That one really makes me
I don't know. It just kind of came up in my head. I was like, oh, I'm just curious.
I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. This I actually learned a lot through past life regression, that the partners that we're going to have in a lifetime, there's like a soul contract. There's an agreement there. And so I don't know. I think it's up to each individual, like what we choose to set up for ourselves. And, it's interesting because I think sometimes we miss our soul's lessons. Maybe somebody's born into like a culture or a faith that they say like, no, you don't leave for any reason. And it's interesting because then they might die unhealed. Maybe they've been married several years, but you can see like the stagnation and the disease and the things that kind of build up as a result of not getting to learn and grow and express. And I don't think that's healthy. I think they were honoring what the programming, what they've been told.
Yes.
But were they honoring themselves? And so for me, the answer is you have to honor yourself. Okay. And I think fate isn't always predetermined. I think sometimes we co-create fate. And so maybe this relationship was supposed to end. I saw it in my office the other day. This relationship, I swear, it probably should have ended. But one of the partners got in a car accident, got a head injury, complete 180, and was like, I'm going to be accountable and I'm going to work on this and I'm going to fix it. And they were able to like do the work that the other partner was too defensive to ever do in the past. Like,
wow.
I don't know, but.
Well, that's a good answer. I mean, I love your philosophy on that. I was just curious. And I guess for me too, by the end with Scott, knowing that he was addicted and not willing to get any help. And I felt like even staying in our house, it was such a traumatic experience for the kids, what they could see on a daily basis. So I was, okay, I need to get out. But that was so fearful. Like, oh, how do I get started on my own? And where, there was just so much fear that came along with that as well and stepping into that. But yeah, I think it was time to move on. You're right. Because I'm starting to get really sick, like you talked about chronic illness. I had gut issues, cysts showing up, one in my vocal cords. So there was just so many signs that if I did remain stagnant in there and felt stuck, almost like a prison, I just get sick,
Yeah. I saw that with my grandma. She was one of my greatest teachers and like my best friend growing up. I just adored this woman, but she also taught me so deeply what not to do. And I actually haven't told the story of my grandma publicly before, but she developed MS when she was 40. She literally woke up one day paralyzed from like almost like the waist down, immobile. And at that time, she wasn't happy in her marriage. My grandfather was very verbally abusive and was having affairs. And then my mom and her sister both went through a divorce at the same time. And they both needed her and they were falling apart. And she just couldn't handle it. And she always put on a smile. You always just thought she was just fine. She was always so happy. But that was never her truth. And her body just couldn't hold that anymore. And she decompensated. And she was so strong even then because the doctors told her that she wouldn't walk and they wanted to prescribe her a wheelchair. She pretty much told them to F off. And she laid in bed and she wiggled her toes until she could move her toes. And then she rotated her ankle and she would, when we were little, she would crawl and chase us crawling across the floor. But I was always pretty empathic even as a kid. And she'd smile, but I could see the pain in her eyes. And I made the connection really young of her body and her emotions. And even though I thought to myself, I don't want to do that, I did that, because that was my generational trauma. And that's what the women in my line did is we smiled and everything's fine. And we worked really hard to make a really pretty picture at our own expense, always. Yeah. And it took me a lot to learn that lesson for myself. But
I love that story about your grandma. That's beautiful. I'm glad you shared that. It's funny. My grandma, my 40th birthday, I was saying my last goodbye to her during COVID time. And her last message is actually what propelled me to I was starting having gut issues, but to go get an MRI. She told me on her, days before passing, she said, when she was grieving her brother who had passed, that stress that she internalized and never worked caused her to have breast cancer. Wow. But she was able to survive breast cancer. She had gone alternative treatments, but she was just telling me that sign. She said, be careful what stress will do to your body. Mm-hmm. And for some reason that dinged in my mind. I said, okay, when I get home, because she lived in Quebec City, back in Alaska, I had asked my doctor for an MRI, breast MRI, and that's where they found the cyst and then I had some issues and needed to find a specialist. And that was kind of that start of those wake-up calls. I love that your grandma was also your teacher.
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, what a gift she gave you.
Yeah, she did. She definitely, I was so close to her too. So you write about your book, The River Rocks, Blocking Our Energy Flow. Can you explain this concept?
I would love to. So this is something that I was actually shown in medicine. And it was so cool because what spirit showed me in this medicine space is that the neuropeptides that we talked about, that's physical, right? That's 3D, it's tangible. But on an energetic level, what they do is, we have the chakra system. We have these energy centers in our body. And energetically, it's like these neuropeptides build blockages in the body. And so our life force energy, it comes in through our crown. And, when we get, let's say, like a divine message of inspiration, God puts it in through our crown so we can receive it. And we use our third eye to visualize it. And then we use our throat to express it and get excited and build energy and share it. And then we use our heart to build up passion and enthusiasm, and we can channel that through our brachial nerves, right? And come out through our hands, like our passionate creation. We make things with love. But then it goes into the stomach and we say, am I good enough to do that? Am I worthy of that idea, of that gift? So a lot of times energy kind of gets stuck here, and then we move it down, right? If we go, yeah, I'm worthy, I can do that, I'm capable. It goes into the hips where we get real creative. That's our goddess energy, our creative power. And then it's where we birth things from, right? Our uterus is there. And so we birth ideas from that place of creativity, and we bring it earthside down through our root chakra. Well, what happens is when we have trauma, what I saw was like, that information from God, it's like, imagine a rock now. And if ideas keep getting stuck here in our solar plexus because we never feel good enough, and then more guidance and inspiration comes in and another little rock gets stuck here, we start to create a dam. Mm-hmm. And so now our energy can't flow to these lower energy centers in our body. And then we start to get disease because that good, yummy life force energy can't move down. It's not being nourished by anything. It's like cut off. And men tend to get cut off right here, which is why men tend to be in their head, very circular, cut off from their feelings, because their river rocks tend to be here. I see women's usually a little bit lower, but not always. But now, one of the gifts I picked up through doing my own work is I can use my hand over people's energy bodies to feel where those river rocks are and to see where the life force energy or the chi stops flowing, and then kind of see what's happening in their body as a result of that. So that's kind of how they showed me the neural peptide thing on an energetic level.
Oh, I love the way you describe it. I'm just so fascinating. The way you put it into words and paint that picture, I can understand it. And actually, one of my favorite meditations I've been doing now for a few months is that I love Wayne Dyer. Yes. And I love him, all his books. Inspiring is one of my favorite books that he wrote. And his morning meditation is actually with breath and affirmations, but from the crown chakra to the root is you're trying to breathe. It's like this meditating, go but it's kind of clearing the crown chakra to the root. So anything that might be stagnant. And so that's the one I've been doing lately and helping in manifestations. And I can feel it. If there's any blockage, it'll kind of clear that out. And actually with my public speaker coach, Casey Baker, she uses Qigong, before we kind of start practicing my speech and my talks, just so if I have any stagnant energy that's kind of blocking me, because this is not something innate. I was always this very shy, quiet girl. So for me to step on a stage and speak is not something that I, super comfortable doing, but I know I feel called to do now. And that's how she works and helps you utilize that energy. But we always have to clear that energy with Qigong.
How beautiful.
Yeah.
I have heard that that's one of the best practices that you can do. Yeah. I was just listening to another podcast the other day about how Qigong is one of the best because it's so physical too. And
well, that's what she teaches. She does these velvet flow classes all the time. She's local. She's in Scottsdale and Sedona. Yeah. Casey Baker. Gosh. She's amazing. You would love her. So what do you say to skeptics who might dismiss your experiences with Christ, our families, and other spiritual entities?
Absolutely. Everybody's going to be ready to hear some of these things and to accept some of these things at their own pace. And I like to create a possibilities folders in people's minds. I'm not here to convince anybody, that my experiences are real or valid, but I know that they are for me. And if we can just have a folder of possibilities and we can utilize our curiosity then we can start to really expand our awareness. And it's funny because with some of these phenomena, evidence is not the thing. Like there's plenty of evidence for this phenomena, and that's not enough for some people, then it'll never be enough. The way I look at it is everything in life can be a miracle or nothing is. And so I choose to live my life seeing the magic and seeing the miracles of the divine all around me. And it feels a lot better than how I felt in my childhood, where there wasn't a lot of magic and there wasn't a lot of miracles.
Oh yeah. It's so magical once you can, connect and see it for your own. They'd have to see it for themselves and start the practices and the guidance and ask for the signs, because it gets so exciting. And when you're living a life of surrendering and fully guided in your soul purpose, you kind of surprise yourself what you can do, and all the miracles.
It's so true. I always, like at the end of my book, I say, I can't wait for you to meet yourself again, because when you do, you are going to blow your own mind.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A question that's just kind of coming to mind right now, just because I was in that situation, where, I'm married to my husband and I see slow progression of, chronic back pain, and then the introduction of opioids and alcohol, and just not willing to see his truth. Like, what would you say to someone that's kind of stuck in that situation right now? And I've tried to help, trying to call BetterHelp. He can do Zoom calls. Let's go to counseling together. I would go to counseling and try and bring home what they would coach me, and with empathy and love. But do you have some recommendation for that partner that's trying to help someone that is an addict?
Oh my goodness. Yes. And because I've lived that reality too, what I found is you did all the right things. I think for a lot of us who are in these relationships, have addicted loved ones in our lives, we have to go through that process of knowing we did everything that we could, because we do love. We love deeply, and it's also wildly out of our control. And the way that we love people without addiction doesn't work with an addict, because they can't receive our love. They are blocked from receiving. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't get through. And so we almost have to spin our own wheels to heal ourselves, to surrender to that reality of, okay, I've exhausted every option. And for me, the biggest indicator of anybody's success is their own motivation. And so if you love somebody who's addicted and they're still defensive and they're still blaming and they're withdrawing from conversations or escalating in anger when you try to bring things up, that's not accountability. What's going to happen is one of three things. And this is where we own ourselves and our truth, and we have to make a bold move. And what that bold move is radical responsibility and acceptance of the situation. And what that looks like is not wavering in your old patterns. And we are so terrified to do that, because we know, if I push this issue, he's going to get upset. He's going to get defensive. He's going to leave. And I have this agenda of I want to save him and I want to save my marriage. So I can't do that. But the thing is, when we're authentic, when we speak our truth, and when we hold our boundaries, then one of three things will happen. Number one, he will see that you're healing, calling him out, speaking up, setting boundaries, and he'll realize that the threat of losing the marriage is real. And he will see that that's a consequence of his own behavior, and he'll opt to start to heal. The second thing that could potentially happen is he'll say, I am so unready and unwilling to deal with this addiction and to look at myself that if she keeps this up, I'm out. Not because I don't love her, not because she hasn't been an angel in my life, but because I'm so terrified of what's under that stone that I don't want to turn over. Because addicts they're not born addicts. They're escaping from trauma. Mm-hmm. And the third thing that could happen is as you speak up, as you have boundaries, as you're more authentic in your expression, it creates a wedge between you two that already exists, but it's going to make it grow even more. And you get more and more healed. He gets stuck. And so the gap just gets really wide, and it organically just starts to dissolve the relationship. But the problem is that as somebody who loves an addict, we often will start on that path, but then we fall back into old patterns because we see the gap growing and we're like, oh God, there's a gap. Like I'm going to lose him. And then we close the gap. And so we do a dance in our relationship.
Yeah, the dance. I've seen that. I've seen that in the cycles that I would go through, you know. I mean, I remember even threatening one time, like, oh, I'm done. I just want a divorce. But then they, you know, step up and, oh, no, you know, and then you're like, oh, okay, let's work this out, you know, and you go through this spiral. And you know why? I think a lot of it too, I would see his soul, right? I saw that young boy that's hurt, that's pain. He was such a wonderful man, like so generous. And he was so smart. I mean, he had so much going for him. I could see deep down in his soul. So I was just like, oh, that hope, like we can bring that back out, you know, but the how, you know, and I actually really wish he had someone like you to go to. And we had started to watch documentaries about the mushrooms, and he had a friend mention that as well. Actually, MDMA, there was a couple that had mentioned that to him. So he had started to kind of talk about those modalities and possibly, you know, going that route, but he had never, you know, he never did. So I'd be curious for me as well, now that people have shared their stories a lot with me, is that plant medicine did help them with their PTSD, like vets. I have heard that a lot for veterinarians. I have people that have done, you know, all the other therapies, and it was the ketamine or ayahuasca for addiction to really, just like you said, connect with the unconscious and your heart and your soul and kind of seeing clearly what needs to be worked on. So I'd be curious, you know, knowing, you know, my story and my children as to what could be next for me, that to really dive into. What do you think would be, you know, I felt like, oh, I've tried this microdosing psilocybin, and now I'm really curious about ayahuasca, but there was always that fear, like, I don't know, this sounds really good. But or ketamine, or, you know, yeah, I'd just be curious to what you think would be beneficial that I should maybe try.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's hard to say because what I want to say, I can't because it's not really legal.
Oh,
so there's that. So just being mindful of that. But,
yeah,
you know, I'll talk about psilocybin because you could go to Denver and you could go to Oregon to have those experiences where it is legal. Now, microdosing is a very different experience than taking a large dose of psilocybin, because a small dose, it's a serotonin boost. It works like an antidepressant. You're very open, more perceptive and aware, more intuitive, but you're not going to have an altered sense of perceptual experience. When you take a dose of 3.5 grams or more, you're going to have a perceptual experience of, you know, your visual acuity changes. You might see, you know, like sacred geometry, or actual have like visual experiences, eyes open and eyes closed visuals. It's very much, you feel it in your body. It's a lot like breath work, but more intense, where you know exactly where the trauma is stored. And it lures you in with like these beautiful shapes and colors. And you're like, ooh, cool. And you feel very blissful. And then it's like, yeah, you like that? Now we're going to go here. And it like drags you by your toes into the darkness. And you're like, oh God, I have to heal all this. And you just like cry, and it's cathartic, and you release. And I have a caution there of like, it takes immense prep work because it really opens you up. And we do have these protectors in our psyche that are there for a reason, and it bypasses those protectors. And so if you haven't done a lot of your own investigative work in your own therapy and your own breath work and your own meditation practices, and you've kind of been avoiding aspects of yourself, like that's not you. But I just want to caution listeners, like, it's not the place to start. It's a place to feel called to when you're like, I have a general form of gnosis. I know myself really well, but there's just some blockages that I'm ready to get to that next level spiritually. Like, it's a good, that's an awesome.
That's how I feel I'm at now, you know, because I had my counselors, the therapists and psychologists. I've done breath work, and I've been listening to so many podcasts about, you know, I met a mom that she does the microdosing of psilocybin because she had postpartum psychosis, and this is the only thing that got her up every morning. And so she's a true believer in that. And I just want to kind of bring awareness for some people that, okay, they're kind of ready maybe to introduce that, but they're afraid because, of course, like you said, it might not be legal in a lot of different states, and it might be judgment. But just bring kind of that awareness, I guess.
Absolutely. And I want to bring awareness to one more thing that I feel is really important, which is MDMA. It's not legal anywhere right now, except for in phase 3, clinical trials. And I've studied actually with MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And Rick Doblin, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, he is the founder of MAPS. And he has been studying MDMA since it was legal. And they used to use it here in the States in couples therapy. And then again, lost the ability to do that with the war on drugs. And this medicine, above and beyond anything else, takes veterans who have had trauma and eliminates their PTSD. These phase 3 clinical trials are showing, and don't quote me, but I think it's something like 67% of veterans no longer meet criteria for PTSD after one session of MDMA. Wow. Because what it does is it takes the amygdala, which is the fight-flight response, sometimes freeze, it suppresses it. So you have zero fear. And then we could go through all the trauma, look at all the things. And what happens is when you look at them without the fear response, you can process them through the body very effectively. And not only that, it's carving a new channel, a new neural pathway where your brain's like, oh, I feel hypo-aroused, I feel safe, and I can recall this memory without that very uncomfortable and scary activation. Maybe it's safe to go there now. And so that memory gets fully processed and this new neural pathway of safety is created. And it works so beautifully in couples therapy because it's like a love medicine. It opens your heart. It's called an empathogen. So you feel wrapped, like the way I imagine it is like wrapped in the way that God loves you, in that kind of just agape type of love. Yeah. As you're working through your traumas, you're seeing them from an aerial view, a higher perspective, and they're no longer registering in your body as terror, as fear. It is the most beautiful medicine. And so I just want to mention it because it is available to people. It is not legal, so just be aware. It's a Schedule 1 narcotic, but it is available in phase 3 clinical trials right now. People do it in the underground. It's risky, but they do. And it just has the most beneficial effects. And so there was a push legislatively this year on the federal level to make it legal. They got turned down, but the research continues, the push continues, and my hope is to be a voice and an advocate for this medicine because it will save lives and heal people.
Oh, wow. I sure hope so. And I know you will. And I'm sure you're not the only clinical therapist that would have seen that, and would like it to be legal and used in a proper way, exactly. for people. I'm so glad that you shared that. Because I've heard that myself as well from a lot of people. It's interesting that you mentioned an amygdala because for Mateus, I had a brain scan done for him with Dr. Amon's clinics. And we just got a results a few days back. And they did say his amygdala is, I guess the way they described it was more active, the fight and flight. So still the fear and anxiety and so it kind of makes sense where his intensity from like being calm to the volcano erupting is quick because he's still in that fight and flight almost, due to trauma. And that could be even before Scott passed because that environment he was in wasn't safe. And there was a lot that we had gone through. We even went through a 7.1 earthquake. And I still remember that really affected my son and myself. We had PTSD, all these aftershocks afterwards. And it was a scary time. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting for me to navigate how to help calm that amygdala, and work on that. And what some things they had suggested was through diet, nutrition, avoiding the dyes, the red dyes, sugars, even gluten. They had mentioned that. They had mentioned using GABA and 5-HTP, things like that, for him, and breath work therapy. Also the what was it called again?
Neurofeedback?
Neurofeedback, yes. Yeah, so I just started, it was 2 days ago, so I'm like, I start researching. So it'll be interesting how I see that helping. I feel like we can all use that, my daughter as well, as they are now. Mateus is 9, Sophia is 11, and still processing. I could still tell that they're very much on edge. I could tell when there's just too much overwhelmingness. It's like that trauma is still there, and then, the stress of the school or whatever is going on, or that grief goes into waves. Now we're approaching our 3 years since we lost Scott, and I felt called to go back to Maui, and that's where it all happened. But like I said, Hawaii is such a sacred, beautiful place that I know we will have hard memories when we're there, but we'll process also I think we'll just process a lot. And I feel like it'll just be really healing for us to be there that same week. Everything kind of happened and we'll be surrounded by our friends and family. And yeah, so I'm just excited for all that. I wanted to ask you, let's see here. I had so many questions, and of course, I'd like to flow with everything, but how can someone integrate profound spiritual experiences into their everyday life?
The mundane is spiritual, right? I think we have opportunities in every moment to become more self-aware, and even just to sit and ask ourselves, am I living the life that I authentically want to be living? Is it bringing me joy, or am I able to find joy in the day-to-day? And it's really fun to have like these peak experiences, right? Where it's like, whoa, like the lightning bolt thing, but that's not like the daily, but like the deepest work is like the integration. And I think really sitting with ourselves and being rigorously honest to figure out, are we living in authenticity with our values and creating a life that we're proud of? And I think that's the work. That's the spiritual work. It's in the mundane.
Oh, that is a beautiful answer. I love all your answers, and I know my audience will too. So how can people find you? Because I have no doubt a lot of people will want to, work with you or go to your counseling. You have two offices, right? In Arizona?
Five.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, we're all over. We're in Mesa. We're in Scottsdale. We have several locations throughout Gilbert. We just bought another building in Mesa, so we're growing again. But as the book's getting ready to come out, it'll be available on Amazon in June, Sacred Revolution. I'm kind of gearing away from some of the traditional psychotherapy. I'm getting ready to start Sacred Revolution retreats where I'll be able to take people into the jungles of Mexico, where I feel so called, and do this sacred work with them, use medicines with them in a setting that takes them away from that mundane. Because I feel like when you step outside of your day-to-day life, your perspective automatically shifts and possibilities feel more real. So we're going to be doing just transformative retreat work, and that will be kind of like TBD. And then I do, if people are local to Arizona, although I don't see clients one-on-one anymore, I do ketamine intensives with them, and I work with a naturopathic doctor. So we have all the medical oversight. It's completely clinical, but we tie in all the spirituality within the confines of my license and run a ketamine practice. And I get a little disillusioned by ketamine, in the clinical setting, where when a psychiatrist gives it, a lot of times it's just like, okay, here's the blindfold, like go hang out for an hour, like we'll see you then, like as if the medicine was doing the work. But we really do the spiritual like container for them. We make it a spiritual experience, and we have a lot of preparation and integration. So those packages are available at innerlightcounseling.org. Yeah. And that's what I'm up to.
And your social on Instagram, people want to follow you and see your next journey.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's Kristy_Sacred Revolution.
Okay.
Kristy.
Fantastic. Well, yes. I cannot wait for your retreat. Count me in.
Thank you.
I love that you'll be doing that. I think that is profound. Every time I've gone to a little healing retreat, my first one was actually in Sedona, a small group of women. It was just, you never come back the same. There's so much growth each time. And you almost have to take yourself away from home life, the routines, and really connect within and find that space. I remember saying I needed a lot of space, and when I moved here. Absolutely. I am so grateful for you today that we were able to talk and connect, and I can't wait to do it again one day soon.
It's been an honor. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Not Alone with Melissa Methven. Your time and attention mean the world to me. Remember, you are never alone in your journey. There is a community filled with support and love, ready to embrace you. I see you and you matter. Until next time, may you find peace and strength in the connections we share. Take care and be kind to yourself.